to thank you for allowing me into your homes for this 12th episode of Season 4 of Esoteric Science Roundtable. And I don't really have any announcements to start the show as I normally do, so I'm going to go ahead and jump right into the topic proper. And today I want to discuss and try to help define somewhat an esoteric term that may have some familiarity with some folks and probably not to most folks, but nonetheless, I wanted to discuss the esoteric term, a higher turn of the spiral. And to begin with, we can just consider all manifestation, all life expression moving in a cyclic manner, and that as a higher expression develops from a lower, we can see this pattern emerging as cycles unfold from each other and play out in all levels of manifestation. All lives in manifestation are subject to certain cycles, and whether that be considering a plant and the sun, the summertime sun, the spring and the summer, and all of the different seasons that allow for different aspects of a plant, for instance, to unfold. All these cycles equally apply for all other kingdoms of nature as well, whether that be animal kingdom, human kingdom, again, plant or mineral or elsewise. And again, we can consider how from a certain point, any point that we pick, we can gauge the previous work that's gone into where we stand now and what we have to anticipate as far as forward work. And we can kind of get a little bit of a glance ahead. And the best example I can use is by using this, which can't be seen too well, but this is a large screw that I picked up a while back. And the way the screw threads incline, you can pick any point along the spiral on the screw, and you can see if you keep rotating around on a higher turn of the spiral, that you'll meet the same point that you were at previously, but again, on a higher turn of the spiral. And so this, again, is a symbolic representation of our journey as we travel, and each of these little rings, each of these screw threads could be considered in a person's life in a person as each lifetime. And as each lifetime unfolds and culminates and offers up some expression, we keep evolving along this spiral, in the spiral fashion, and we find ourselves improving and gaining on what we've previously built into ourselves. So this is an ongoing process that finds itself expressing itself through the human kingdoms and all other kingdoms in nature as well, that there is an evolutionary process that demonstrates itself, and we can take a look at certain cyclic unfoldings and certain processes that play themselves out in nature, and we can gain some insight and some understanding into what will be by, again, studying our history and understanding ourselves. Again, the Greek axiom that I bring up periodically on this show, man, know thyself. When we take an internal look into ourselves and we seek to gain some insight into how we think and why we think, why we think the way that we do, and what motivates us. All of these kind of introspective questions can allow us some point to consider and see, again, considering where we've been in the past and where we can be heading in the future, that these cycles will give us some examples to fall back on and follow. And one of the main considerations as far as from an esoteric or inner perspective is the unfolding of mind. And I have mentioned this statement before on the show that, in essence, our human evolution is also a demonstration of the quality of mind emerging throughout humanity. And so mind evolves and refines itself through a series of many lifetimes for an individual. And also we can see collectively how a group mentality, whatever level of information, education, is available for humanity, we can see that rising again on the spiral, in a spiral fashion. And so we're in a constant place of refinement. We continually refine our ability to think, to feel. All of these things allow us to, again, to gauge somewhat the evolutionary process. Excuse me. Again, considering that our human evolution is the evolution of mind, and we can demonstrate how mind has progressed from its earliest seed in humanity when we first became self-conscious, and we could say I am initially, that this mind quality has evolved and found its way into a relatively potent place in our human condition. And so mind in the human condition is constantly in a state of jockeying for position, if you will, in most people's expression between, again, the mind nature and the emotional nature. And so there's going to be a battle, if you will, taking place within the physical bodies, or the consciousness, if you will, of our humanity. And so each individual on the planet has faced this at some level, at some lifetime, and this is a refining process that allows us to move forward and gain from all of our experience. And again, seek to find some balance. And that is always another key thing, too, that is of paramount importance in any kind of esoteric way to consider things, is that there has to be some point of balance considered, so that we can understand things from a point of discernment, and so that we are not overly biased about certain things. And so again, trying to find a point of balance will allow us to look at ourselves in an honest way and assess the scene around in the most honest way that we can, and with as much information, factual information, as we can. So again, the desire nature in humanity has constantly found itself emerging throughout time. And in the earliest portions of humanity in which we first did become self-conscious, the ability to reason and things of that nature were not existent. We did not have the ability to think. The idea of adding numbers and these kind of concepts, these abstract concepts that are very common and prevalent in today's society, had no place back then. Again, the mind nature was very embryonic and just starting to unfold itself at this point in time. That again, the desire nature finds itself in some sort of a battle, some sort of a jockeying. And in the instance of considering previous evolutionary unfoldings, certainly the farther back into antiquity, the less we can consider things with any real accuracy. And that is certainly one key problem that people that try to consider things from an esoteric angle or from a spiritual perspective run into, is that how can we accurately determine what took place thousands of years ago or tens of thousands of years ago? And certain individuals in our humanity have been able to build into themselves, by finding some sort of a balance between the mind and the emotional nature, and to build in this balance so that they could perceive into realms that are generally untouched, unperceived, and unrealized by most of humanity. And so again, from this point of balance and from one's intent, one can seek to find the balance and seek to unfold, again, some means to improve oneself. And again, considering that there are different methods or means by which we can discern far back into antiquity, again, not all science or science or the education will agree with these ideas, but nonetheless, there are certain individuals that are able to perceive into different areas of mind, and they're able to perceive past the abstract concept of mind to a place where past, present, and potential future can be gained and ascertained to a certain degree. And this is traditionally called the Akashic Record. And this is basically an imprint, if you will, of all. It's like an energetic imprint that has made a mark or made some, again, a record, some way in which we can look back at the energy and the way it's impacted, again, the quality of mind. And so we can perceive at a certain level and look into the so-called Akashic Record, and we can perceive, again, what took place in the past, certainly get more understanding of what's going on in the present time, and have some inkling or some indication of what will unfold in the future. And so again, keeping in mind that through these means, certain individuals have been able to discern far back into antiquity and have considered how our previous evolutionary unfolding ties into what's currently taking place in our humanity. And we can certainly go back to the point where the quality of mind or self-consciousness first showed up with humanity, but that really doesn't give us the clearest indication, because the main portion of us that we were working on at that time was the physical body. And so if we fast forward somewhat to another great cycle that took place in antiquity, this would be referred to as the Atlantean dispensation, or the Atlantean age, or the continent of Atlantis, and that there was indeed a great society that cropped up tens of thousands of years ago that did indeed, again, they had much technology that rivals what we have today. Again, this is not very easy to prove or to substantiate, because we don't have, for instance, the vehicles that were used, or the telecommunications devices that were used, or the means that were used back then to take advantage of energy sources, to harness energy. And so we don't have working models or diagrams or books or anything of that nature from that long ago to fall back on. And so we have to use an extrasensory means to reach in and perceive when we're considering things that are this far back into our human history. And so with this consideration of the Atlantean times, again, we can look back to the various stages and cycles that worked themselves out and unfolded through the Atlantean age, and we can consider how these steps or stages or cycles helped lead, again, to the unfolding of the quality or capacity or potency of mind that is so prevalent in our current age. And so, again, the mind nature back in the Atlantean days was still more relegated to or held in check by our emotions. The desire nature was the primary motivating force or factor in the Atlantean days that drove us, motivated us, and propelled us. Again, we didn't think in those early days of things in as far as logic and reason and things of that nature. Excuse me. The main way in which the early Atlantean occupants were able to gain and grow and to build in the capacity of mind was through memory. Memory was the component that allowed them to further experience situations and to further relate and relay what was going on within themselves and within society. And so rather than naming something, if there was a plant or something like that, or an animal, rather than identifying it by some name, it was more considered or recollected through memory. And the capacity to remember things was very great back in this day. And it's definitely waned and decreased considerably in our day and age, that our ability to memorize or remember things, and depending on certain circumstances outside of that, certain people are going to have a better ability to retain or remember things. But overall, the ability has receded itself and has taken a back seat to intellect. And again, the reasoning and the using of logic and these kind of problem-solving methods. And so the early Atlantean would, if they came upon a situation, they would go from their memory to decide how to proceed with a certain situation. If they didn't have anything in their memory to go back on, to fall back on, to size up the situation, then they would have to devise a new set of memories to accommodate this new experience that they were coming into contact with. Whereas a person in this day and age, let's say you got dropped out in the woods and you got lost or something like that, you would use a logical, I would think most people would use some kind of logical means, some kind of a reasoning or deductive method to try to find themselves shelter, look for help, any number of things. But it wouldn't be based on some memory of being in the situation before. We would have to depend on our wits, and we would have to use our intellect and to devise some means to extract ourselves from some kind of predicament. And so that's definitely changed and evolved as time has progressed. Again, considering a lot of these things on a higher turn of the spiral, to go back to the screw example that I was using earlier, all of the transportation, communication, again, energy deriving devices that were in existence in the ancient days are finding themselves repeating or recurring, obviously in a somewhat different form to fit our current age, but nonetheless the intent behind these ideas and also the mass spreading of these concepts has altered considerably. But on a higher turn of the spiral, we find individuals coming into an incarnation that are ready and fit to take on some aspect of some work. They're young people that would come into an incarnation that have had previous lives in which they did some kind of electronics, or they worked on some kind of transportation devices or what have you. These individuals would find themselves in later lives in similar positions. So again, on a higher turn of the spiral, the evolutionary spiral, we repeat where we've been before and we add and gain from that experience. And so there are individuals that are coming into incarnation in this day and age that are coming ready with a full toolkit, with a full set of with a ready understanding of the work at hand, and also a wise ability to work constructively, and also with a know-how to implement what needs to be implemented. And so again, we find individuals making their way into incarnation in various places on the globe that will fit in to these respective countries, communities, societies, what have you, that will be able to demonstrate what they've gained from the past and reapply it for some new application for our future unfolding. And there's an individual that I am quite fond of in his writings named Edgar Cayce. He's known as the Sleeping Prophet. And he was a relatively simple man. He was very Christian in his mentality, and he would go into some trance-type state. He would go into a sleep state or trance state, and people would be able to question him and ask him various information. And he would do what are called life readings for different individuals, and he would do them oftentimes for young children to give them some indication, or more so their parents, some indication of the child's vocation, what they're likely going to, some of their pursuits that they're likely going to gravitate towards from previous experience. And so again, these children on a higher turn of the spiral will revisit some of the previous work that they were involved in. And in many instances in these life readings, Edgar Cayce would tap upon lives that transpired during the Atlantean times. And they would say, during this time, during the Atlantean time, during this, and this individual worked on, telecommunication devices or transportation, whatever, any number of very advanced technological concepts that allegedly, supposedly, were readily available and reached a high state of refinement back in this ancient age. That this may seem very, very fanciful to many people, especially those that are, perhaps university educated or just consider themselves more in line with mainstream contemporary thinking, that this just completely sounds silly. But nonetheless, there are means by which either we can ourselves discern, again, these past events through, again, an internal searching, turning the searchlight inside and using ourselves as a means by which to discern this information. At the very least, we can, through our own understanding, listen to different theories and what have you, and try to comprise or compose our own understanding from what we've read or experienced or whatever's impacted us from outside sources, that we can develop our own philosophy and see if indeed these things tend to ring true with us, or if they don't seem to meet the grade, and then they can be relegated to some other place until we can bring them into our philosophy, or we can discard them entirely. And so this is another example of how we find ourselves taking in information and using it, or again, putting it on the shelf until it can be applied, and the time is right for it. And so again, one other portion or condition of this higher turn of the spiral is that individuals, as they move through different lifetimes, find themselves in various places in different ages. And so people are going to end up with groups, for instance, that express themselves in the past. We can find a recurring or a reincarnation, if you will, of some group activity or group energy. And this is certainly certainly a definite component of this Atlantean inclination, that those that had spent many lifetimes in Atlantis, which quite a few of us have done, that are currently inhabiting the globe as we speak, that those individuals that shared this common experience on this continent, so we're talking about some numbers of people here, that they would find themselves somehow there would be a recurring, if you will. They would have a resurgence of this energy, again on a higher turn of the spiral, and that they would revisit the previous work with even more ability and more capacity, again considering that the mind nature, as it unfolds and develops in humanity, will reflect and amplify what has been previously experienced, but will provide us with what we need to further propel into the future. And so, again, another component of this is the current migration of peoples to different places on the globe. Certainly we can consider those individuals that were born in certain countries, there was some reason, obviously, for them being born in these particular regions of the globe. Now, certainly in this day and age, it's much more common for individuals to move around and resettle and things of that nature. But nonetheless, that in and of itself has some tie to this remigration, and that we find ourselves constantly migrating from lifetime to lifetime into situations that will allow us to learn our life lessons, to allow group workings out, and for us to not only pay our karmic debt, but to gain the experience that we need for further work. And so what's currently taking place in America is just this, a reincarnation or a reappearance on a higher turn of the spiral of what took place in the Atlantean days. And so all of the high technological achievements of that age are finding themselves being demonstrated again for our day and age, and for our applications. And this will continue to unfold itself, and we will continue to manifest in our current age different aspects of what we perfected previously. And so this will be an ongoing process, and then we'll have even a larger, actually two larger cycles outside of our current cycle that will culminate our experience on this globe. And so these are all based ultimately on cycles of 7. 3s and 7s, for the most part, substantiate or form a basis for all building, all form in manifestation. And so cycles of 7 tend to recur and repeat themselves in an individual human's life, that we see through cycles of 7, 14, 21, 28, 35. These different, every 7 years there's a cyclic unfolding in the individual, and every larger cycles of 7 would reflect something that would encompass all of humanity. And so considering that in the Atlantean day there were 7 distinct cycles that cropped up and made themselves manifest. Now, keeping in mind that all these cycles don't just crop up and then end, and then another one comes into being. They always overlap, and so as one is fading out, another one's in the process of coming into manifestation. So there's always overlapping where the old meets the new and interacts with the new for some time until the new impulse becomes the dominant impulse, and the old is, fades away or is receded. And so considering again these cycles of 7 within the Atlantean continent, the divisions as they're given there's a particular individual named W. Scott Elliott who wrote a book called The Story of Atlantis, and that's one great source for information about early Atlantis. Also, Ignatius Donnelly, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, is another great reference source in order to get more information. Again, keeping in mind that information that is gleaned or considered about this far back period in our humanity has to be considered again either with a grain of salt or with some sense of discernment, because we don't have again records readily available for us to just tap into to see exactly what was going on back then. But just to enumerate the 7 different ages or races, sub-races that took place in Atlantis. The Rimohal is the first. The Tlavatli would be the second. The third would be the Toltec. Fourth would be First Turanian. Fifth is the original Semitic. Sixth is the Akkadian. And the 7th is the Mongolian. And so if we consider some of these names should be familiar to certain individuals. Toltec certainly we can consider as an early civilization that found its way into Central America, and then from that Mayan, and then later Aztec. The original Semitic, all those Semitic people that are on the globe in this day and age found their origins in the Atlantean age. And so on a higher turn of the spiral, we can see, again, Semitic dissemination or Semitic bloodline finding its way into manifestation and maintaining itself. And the last one, the Mongolian. Many of the Asian races, the Chinese and the Japanese races, sprang up in the Atlantean day, and so we still have the remnants of all that. China certainly is still a very relevant country, and the Japanese for that matter as well. A lot of the lesser countries that found their origins in these early times still have a role to play, a major role to play in the unfolding of humanity's mental ability. And so again, this continues to unfold. And then if we consider after the Atlantean, these 7 races found their way into manifestation, that an ending of that particular dispensation kicked in, and an uprising of something new occurred as well. So this is another example of a cycle in which what is finished recedes or subsides. In the case of Atlantis, it's the complete continent subsided below the water. And so we were destroyed by water. And these are where we get the flood myths from antiquity that all the world's religions refer to. And so the water that destroyed the Atlantean day also has its symbolic tie to the emotional nature. Water ever symbolizes the emotions, or the astral body so-called, and our desire nature. And so as mind continually relates to emotions, again, there's a process that works out from that. And if we can consider in the sense of mind being symbolized by fire and the emotional nature being symbolized by water, that when these two meet, then there's going to be some, like a front, if you will, or there's going to be some activity resulting from that. In essence, if you want to consider fire meeting water and creating steam, that this steam energy has to be considered in terms of intent. And as we, to use it, again, to consider these things symbolically, if we take the fire of the mind and our intent, our fiery intent of the mind, and attempt to overcome the emotional nature, then what we could consider a steam condition arising within our humanity. So like storm fronts coming together in a sense. And so that energy, the steam or the electrical energy that arises from these clashes of fronts can be harnessed. And this is the key to esoteric science, in that one, through these methods and means, can take the energy that's derived or generated and put it to some use, some specific use. And again, intent and the mind dominates this process when it's considered intelligently. Again, there are many of the bulk of humanity, for that matter, still have their components, their largest component tied up in the emotional nature. And so that we are still, by and large, most of humanity are, this is the dominant aspect of them, which is the astral or the emotional, and they're trying to work out their desires. This is something that, in this day and age, is quite prominent and prevalent as well. And this is a leftover residual condition that we still have. It's still a viable thing that we have to consider and deal with and put it in its proper perspective. And so we are constantly relating mind to emotion, the head versus the heart. Does the head rule out and logic and reason, or does the emotional nature carry us away and whisk us away, and the watery aspects of that symbolism, are we wishy-washy with the emotions, or are we going to be firm and fired and ignited within our intent and our intellect? And so this is a constant battle that takes place. The idea of meditation and stilling oneself and looking in internally and discerning oneself in this introspective sense, these are the tools that have been in effect for thousands and thousands of years, that have allowed humanity, those that consider these aspects of themselves, these are the tools that are available to, again, find that balance, strike the balance between emotional nature and mental nature. And obviously, there are other aspects of ourselves too, but these are the main two dominating conditions that are constantly affecting us. And depending on our makeup, some people may swing very violently from an emotional condition to a mental condition, or to an intellect-driven condition. Or some people are going to be very focused in an intellectual fashion, and others will be very much just wearing their heart on their sleeve and very emotional about everything that comes into their realm of experience and that they consider. And so again, this activity can be this method of thinking can be enacted to allow for some synthesis, and then again some energetic moving out from that point. So if we consider again the entire unfolding of the Atlantean, all 7 great ages of the Atlantean dispensation as being represented by or symbolic of water, and obviously the idea that the continent subsided and was destroyed by water is very symbolic, again tying back to our emotional nature. In our emotional nature, again, it's a very fluid condition, and this, again, there are many analogies or symbolic references we can fall back on. But ultimately, the Atlantean age ended by water, was destroyed by water, and again, this symbolizes some aspect of our emotional nature being somewhat subsided as well, or finding itself below the threshold of consciousness. And this is something that took place in our evolution. As we move forward past this Atlantean dispensation, we were able to relegate certain aspects of the emotional nature to a point below our conscious understanding. And so we weren't actively considering the emotions. They are more automatic at this point. And so as we can consider how we can take advantage of our current dispensation, as we are currently in what's known as the Aryan dispensation, and we've seen that up to this certain point go through, first of all, the Asian Indian dispensation, Persian, then thirdly the Egyptian, Babylonian, Chaldean, and Hebrew. All those 4 came together in the third segment. Then the fourth would be the Greco-Roman, fifth, which is our current, is the Anglo-Saxon dominated dispensation of the Aryan cycle. And so this is actually fast passing out of existence, and the influence of this of the Anglo-Saxon dominated subsection of this current Aryan race is fast moving to the background. And so we're on the verge of birthing a new aspect of our race, a new aspect of humanity that won't be so much a specific body type or so much a cultural way of looking at things, but it'll be more so with the way people think, with a certain way of thinking. This will comprise those that are able to be Aquarian. And again, the water aspect comes into play here, but also cooperation is a keynote. Cooperation and synthesis are keynotes or key components of the Aquarian dispensation. So we have lining up or tying themselves together, these great energetic workings out, relating or relaying the ending of the fifth subrace of the Aryan age with this coming in of the mind nature and the ability to think along a certain lines, to think along the idea with the idea of goodwill and right human relations as prominent and first and foremost in the thinking of human consciousness, and that some component of service, some way in which we can consider how we can help alleviate the suffering of others or help serve our fellow man begins to creep into our consideration. And this sixth subrace, so-called, of our current Aryan age will, again, not be a certain body type, but it will be characterized by those that seek to cooperate, synthesize, and look for the highest and the best good of all individuals. Now, certainly there are going to be those, or there are those remnants of the Anglo-Saxon dominated portion of our humanity that want to cling to and hold on to that which they've established. And so they're very reluctant to relinquish their grip on what they've established and built up. And this is part of a really large destructive cycle that's going on now in our humanity, in which we find, again, on a higher turn of the spiral, if I can fall back to the screw thread example, what had occurred in a previous time finds itself recurring and repeating, but with more emphasis, more potency, and more of a definite impact on our current situation as humanity unfolds. And so this would, in this instance, would refer to a time in which the forces of light, if you will, waged a great battle with the forces of darkness. And so we have highly evolved individuals that we can think of as white magicians or black magicians that are seeking to carry out some work. The white magician is seeking to serve humanity creatively and to encourage humanity to cooperate together. The black magician seeks a synthesis in which a handful dominate, dictate, and direct the masses. And so this battle took place in ancient times, and when this did find itself playing out in the Atlantean days, for the most part, the dark forces did gain the upper hand temporarily, and the forces of light were obligated to recede into the background and to work from a more of a hidden or esoteric or occult by occult means, and not be directly working hand in hand with humanity as they had been previously. And so they had to recede themselves entirely, dismiss themselves from that work in a sense, although they still do work behind the scenes to influence and offer a hint or some help in some way to those that they feel can again help the evolutionary process of humanity at some level. And so they're always seeking to find those who can serve and to emphasize and uplift their service. And so we can find ourselves in rapport with these light workers, if you will, that work behind the scenes, just in the same sense that those that seek selfish material ends work with a group that is set themselves apart to explore the material nature and to delve into separation and selfishness and to extract that and to consider those concepts. And so there's always this fighting going on. There's not only just the fighting within our human vehicle. Each person faces these battles that rage within our bodies on a day-to-day basis. There is a larger folding out in which these very refined and potent forces find themselves, again, jockeying for some kind of position, some kind of advantage. In all actuality, considering things from an esoteric or inner angle, these dark forces have been defeated, diminished, and relegated to a certain degree, although, symbolically speaking, the door where evil dwells has not been sealed. And this is something that is, for all those that seek truth, and all those that seek to serve their fellow man, these are the individuals that are going to try to apply these ideas, and they're going to seek to improve themselves in order to help salvage the race at some level. And so again, we see again on a higher turn of the spiral this playing itself out again, and there's a definite demarcation that's demonstrating itself in which these dark brothers, if you will, have chosen their workers, and those of the light brigade are having their cavalry in effect as well. And so there's this working out, and this is manifesting itself in a lot of chaos globally. And as synthesis sets in over time, there's going to be a domination one way or the other, in which this yin and yang position will kind of give way to domination one way or the other. In actuality, as I said earlier, the dark forces have been defeated, and for all intents and purposes, they have been defeated. Their raging on the physical plane is a last gasp. It is their last death throw to try to salvage what they feel that they, by their birthright, have built and constructed for their selfish ends and for maybe some goal that they have, some distorted or misdirected view that they have, that they are in some way or another serving humanity. And I would say that there are certain political leaders that are putting themselves in this position that they feel that they are either they feel that they're working, doing some divine work, or they're being compelled or propelled at some level. They're being influenced at some level, and so this is playing itself out on the globe in a very dramatic and drastic fashion in this day and age. And so it seems as if we're just being overwhelmed by a lot of destruction, death, chaos, weather conditions, war, famine, pestilence, all these things that can be considered from a biblical consideration, a revelation kind of perspective. And if that's exclusively considered, especially a literal interpretation of these documents, the Revelation, for instance, one might tend to be a little bit frightened by this. And we encourage enlightenment instead of enfrightenment on this program, and we encourage people to think about these ideas, think about this larger playing out that's making itself manifest. With any disease, it has to find its way to the surface and be readily apparent before we can acknowledge it and deal with it. And this is really what's going on right now. All the seeming chaos and disruption that's going on right now is just the physical demonstration or manifestation of this leftover residual funk, if you will, and this karmic obligation that we're working out, and we're working it out in a group fashion. So those that have aligned themselves with the forces of light are seeking to align and cooperate in a fashion that will allow for more light to express itself. If we consider the idea of light, a small amount of light can dispel or disperse a large, vast area of darkness. If you light a lighter in a dark room, you instantly have a fairly lit area. And this analogy holds true in a metaphysical sense, that a small amount of light can dispel and discharge much darkness. And so this is our opportunity, if we will. This is what we can choose to work towards. And so our challenge is to balance between the mind and the emotion, and from that, again, the fire of the mind, the water of the emotions, bring those together. The steam that is developed should be steered and directed, and that's our challenge, is to determine how to steer and direct our energetic movings out, how to create something of real and rare beauty on the planet collectively, our collective cooperation with one another. And so this is something that we can take advantage of if we choose to. If we discern, use discernment, and if we take a look around, if we assess a situation, in a real honest fashion, then we can consider what we can do. We can all cooperate and do something to help alleviate the suffering of humanity if we so choose. Not everybody's going to want to even consider that. Those that consider it and start to have the pangs of responsibility kicking in are going to start to hopefully consider more so what they can practically do to help us out, help all humanity out. And this is what I encourage individuals to do, is to think, what are your abilities, what are your skills, and what will allow you to create something, again, of rare beauty, some opportunity, some cooperative endeavor, something that will allow for again, helping out of humanity. Goodwill, right human relations, all these conditions are worth considering and manifesting, implementing practically. So those are the things I want to express today. Let me go ahead and grab a couple calls. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Yes, hi. Am I on the air now?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, well, first I want to say everything you say makes great sense, and I appreciate your ability to be so articulate about this. I've been on hold here for a little while, and
thank you for taking the time to hold, and long as you have.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm glad that you finished, but I think you almost kind of answered what I was going to ask about, and that was about our current in America as a group, our militaristic aspect. And I'm really afraid that we're getting sucked into something. Well, I think we've already been sucked into something in Iraq that is going to end up being much, much worse for us than we might have some idea. The idea of having hands off Syria and Iran is a great idea. But I think you kind of already answered what I was asking with this when you said that last gasp thing, about this.
Yes, they're making a last-ditch effort to salvage what they've constructed for thousands of years. They feel they have a definite birthright to maintain some global supremacy, some dominance, to continue what they feel is right and proper. And I can't say I knock every individual. I'm not hating these people for their misguided views. This is a condition of our humanity. Once we accept and acknowledge it, rather than infighting, rather than saying, Democrat, Republican, or anything along those lines, let's look at the issues and let's move forward collectively. That's our challenge.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, and good luck.
Okay, thanks. Take care. Bye. Have a nice evening. Appreciate the call. Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Hi. I had actually the last caller talked a little bit about what I want to ask, but a little bit about your concept of the white magician and the dark magician, the two forces. You see a lot of the dark forces. The dark magicians kind of in the world today can kind of point the finger at various individuals. Do you see any particular examples of kind of the white magic, the white power there, like particular specific examples in the world, or do we still have to wait for those to kind of come about? Like I see people like in the past, say Martin Luther King and people like that, maybe the Dalai Lama now, people like that. Do you see any examples of that today?
These people I would put on the periphery of, the light workers or what have you. They're certainly key components, but nonetheless, let's see here. As far as there definitely are. As a matter of fact, one thing that I really want to see, I have always sought to express on this show, is that a lot of concepts that you think of, like a new world order, that is a spiritual term that has been taken over, if you will. It's been it's been distorted by those that wish to enslave us. A lot of these original ideas of synthesis, globalization, cooperation, sovereign countries working together and being respective of the other's sovereignty, these are spiritual concepts that when we see global synthesis taking place, when we hear New World Order and we hear these types of concepts and these catchphrases, we often tend to just immediately put them right back on the globalist and think that this is some inception exclusively of theirs and that they're the sole arbiters of what is going to unfold. And so if they are the controllers, they're going to allow something, you know, negative or malignant to come forward. But really, they're playing into the hands of the forces of light. If you really can consider it from a metaphysical or inner plane perspective, everything that they're building up, all these great systems that are being created, are one day going to be taken over by those that can use these systems to help create and cooperate and exchange and synthesize and uplift humanity. A synthetic idea, you know, the globe being synthetic, that can be considered from a New World Order kind of term, and that you might think that, well, there's only a handful of individuals that are trying to synthesize things for their own benefit. I don't see it that way. I see that there are those interplane workers that are, you know, causing these individuals to create these circumstances, not causing them to, but influencing them at certain levels. So you've got dark workers and light workers influencing, let's say, a Martin Luther King, or influencing and maybe working in some relation with a Dalai Lama and these great. Because even, you know, like Hitler, for instance, was definitely a proponent or a player of the dark forces. He was, in essence, possessed, as were some of his closer advisors and officers and the Italians as well. They were, for all intents and purposes, possessed. And so what they created, again, it's hard to consider things exclusively in terms of dark and light and good and evil, because all things in manifestation have a purpose. And so to look at some of these unfoldings as pure evil, I think is somewhat a misconception. And that gets to be a little convoluted, and I'll probably have to take a show to explain more so what I mean about that. But spiritual concepts have been co-opted from the get-go. That's always been the case, that when something right and proper and spiritual has an impulse coming out, that there are going to be those that co-opt it. They're going to try to distort it. Just like if you look at the logo design for our show, towards the end of the show, we have an upright star, a 5-pointed star, you know, the top point up. The inverted aspect of that obviously means something different. It's a negative representation of that same symbol. So when things are inverted or distorted, they take on a selfish or separate aspect. And so that's, again, it's just another aspect of them co-opting us. It's just a matter of almost like flipping a switch at some point in time. When enough of humanity collectively understand what's at stake and they understand the real issues, we'll just take over the lease, so to speak. And all that's been built that has been for the gain of the few will be employed for the helping out of the many, and that will manifest itself, I'm quite confident.
Okay. So actually the structure they're creating now, I guess the New World Order, that kind of thing, it's actually going to be, it's actually potentially a positive thing they're creating, because it's going to be taken over by the forces. But
it won't be taken over in a violent fashion. It will be seeded over more in a sense. There will be a spontaneous synthesis of cooperation that will find its way into manifestation, that will completely overwhelm the existing material thinking. It'll render it obsolete. And so just like certain things can't exist, in a vacuum without dying, this material nature will not be able to exist in a spirit of cooperation and love. When love is the main energy that dominates the planet, then this material selfish tendency cannot exist. It can't grow, it can't flourish at all. And so yes, we're seeing that. We're seeing the last gasp of this, those that wish to enslave us, and we'll be able to take over the reins, and we'll be able to steer in a much more cooperative fashion. We're right on the brink of this. This is why so much there seems to be so much hammering of humanity right now because they're very desperate. They're very desperate to hold on to what they've gained. They know the time is short. They know the time is so short. They have fear. They have fear like you can't even comprehend. And so by virtue of them being so fearful, they're lashing out. And as they lash out in desperation, just like an animal caged in or backed into a corner, you know, they're going to expire themselves. They're going to tire themselves out, and they're going to fall by the wayside. Boom, just like that. So just give it some time and think constructively, work positively and constructively and cooperatively, and it'll happen sooner than you can even imagine.
Can you recommend any particular websites or weblogs or anything like that that really kind of talk about or maybe introduce one to the kind of concepts you're talking about on the show?
I don't get around a computer very often. I don't know. I mean, there are handfuls of books that you might consider. Some from like a theosophical perspective, the term theosophy, they give you some insight.
Any particularly good introductory books?
See, there are some books written, like there's a lady named Alice A. Bailey that wrote her books up into the 50s. So you get commentary on like the Soviet Union, the United Nations, and how it kind of got off on the wrong foot and things of that nature. And so I would say Alice A. Bailey is a great source. They're not starter books, though, by any stretch of the imagination, but they contain such a wealth of information. Manly Palmer Hall is a good person to consider. I might consider, maybe Manly Palmer Hall, MANLYPHALL. He was a high-level Mason, and so he has some insight into a lot of these things, too.
Could you spell that first name again, please?
MANLY, Manly Palmer Hall, or P Hall, Manly P Hall.
Okay.
Their organization is the Philosophical Research Society, and they're in the Los Angeles area. All right?
Well, thank you, Corey.
Thanks. Take care. Have a nice evening. Hello, caller. You're going to be the last caller. How are you?
Hi.
Question or comment?
Yeah, I just had a question real quick before you got off the air.
Go ahead.
Extraterrestrial life, what do you think about that?
That has a definite key component in the evolutionary unfoldment of not only mind in humanity, but... Okay. Are you an alien, my friend, or something? Oops. Yeah, the alien thing is a definite... there are extra cosmic energies and there are extraterrestrial entities that do work with humanity at certain levels. Some have, they've co-opted us at certain levels, and others seek to kind of watch and see what's going on and hope that we figure things out in adequate time. And we're on the verge of that right now. So there are those that are kind of watching to see how we react. They know this is a great turning point, a transition point in humanity, and so they're very cognizant, although they do, for the most part, respect our free will. Again, there are those that do infringe and that have taken advantage, and they've been on the planet for some time building systems of enslavement. So that's something to consider as well. But they do have their component in the larger workings out of things. I do want to thank everybody for taking the time to view. I want to remind folks that we are here every Thursday on Channel 11 from 8 to 9 p.m. I want to remind folks to check out Therefore I Am every Tuesday at 10 p.m. on Channel 16. I want to thank my producer, Chris, for commanding the helm of the Starship Esoterica. And again, I want to just encourage people to consider what they can to help work with each other, get along, and cooperate with one another. Thanks, Austin. Have a nice evening. Take care.